Hello, welcome to Reclaiming Perception. Delighted to have as my guest tonight, Mark Devlin. Mark is a significant evidence to prove really that there's Satanism and occult symbolism in the music industry. I've been blown away, as I am by many of my guests, by the level of research that Mark's done. I've been to his presentations and it really did open my eyes, and I must admit, if anybody's watching tonight and they haven't looked into this, when you actually finish this show you will be very shocked and very surprised, as I was. I'm pretty sure of it. So welcome to the show, Mark. Thank you ever so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Good to be here.
Yeah, and what I like to do with my guest is, rather than me waffle on about the guest, I like the guests to introduce themselves. So if you could just give us a bit of background about you, what led you to this path, this journey that you're on right now, why are you credible to pull this information together?
Well, sometimes I wonder that myself, particularly on days like today. I ask myself, how did I get from where I was to where I am now? Mm-hmm. Well, I've been a club and radio DJ for the past 28 years now. And so I got started in 1990. And all the way through to about 2010, I just went through the motions of what was expected of you as a music industry player. So I was there doing radio shows, playing all the records that the record companies were servicing me with. I was interviewing a whole bunch of artists. I was out there in the clubs playing records. I was writing for some music magazines as well. I wrote for Blues and Soul magazine for 9 years and a bunch of other magazines as well. And I really didn't give any second thought to what it was I was a part of in terms of the industry. Everything just seemed to be normal to me. Everything just ticked along, and I had no reason to question anything. But I've always been someone that has been prepared to think outside the box. And at various points in my life, I have asked a few of the big important questions in life, such as, what is this place that we find ourselves in? What is the nature of this thing we call life? What are we doing here? You know, what is this thing that people refer to as God? You know, things that people should be talking about around the water cooler at work, but they tend not to. They're the sort of questions I've always asked. And things got to a point round about 2007, 2008, where I was starting to do a lot of reading and a lot of reflecting and a lot of musing on these kind of questions. And I was reading the books of David Icke. And it was actually my dad that put me onto them, because my dad is a deep thinking guy as well. And he's always kind of encouraged me to not be afraid to stray from the pack and to go your own way and do your own thing. And that's been some very valuable grounding for me in my life in getting me onto this path. So around about 2007, 2008, I was reading the books of David Icke and other authors and researchers and reflecting on all this kind of information, these alternative takes on what life is all about and what this world really is. And in 2010, I don't really know how it happened, but everything just seemed to come together, and it started to make sense to me in a way that it hadn't before. It was like I'd put all these pieces to a giant jigsaw puzzle together, and I could suddenly see through the veil of illusion and the fog of a mind-controlled trance that I'd been in for all my life up to that point. And everything started to make sense. I could see that the world is not controlled, it's not run by the people we're told it's run by. Politicians and so-called world leaders are not the ones calling the shots. There are individuals and groups and networks coming through a network of secret societies and dark occult mystery schools that are actually presiding over every aspect of daily human life. And this filters all the way down through the world of politics, through the world of big business, science, the military, the academic, educational establishments, all the big corporations, and of course, it happens in the entertainment industry. And the Hollywood film industry and the music industry, of which I've been a part, are major tools in the system of mind control, culture creation, and social engineering that we have going on in the background, which few people ever think to question. So my task became trying to understand how the industry that I've been a part of for so long was playing its part in shaping and molding the perceptions and the values of the masses in the general public. And that's the path I've been on since 2010. I would never have believed that I would be on it. If you told me 10 years ago that this is what I'd be doing with my life, I'd have scoffed at you and called you crazy. But here we are. The world and life, it would seem, is a very strange thing sometimes.
I'm actually in a position where I'd rather be considered crazy than toe the line, and I'm very similar to you. I had a background, mine was a corporate world, so what I'm at now, I would have never dreamed that I would be doing what I'm doing right now. So I wonder how many people David Icke's woken up, by the way, because, the amount of guests that I have on here who say they read one of David Icke's book and they got some validation from the journey that they've been on. And it's from all different angles. So you're looking at the music industry and the entertainment industry, but there's people who are coming at it from a therapeutic perspective, and they get involved in looking at Satanism and occultism. And just all of it is all connected. And the underbelly, or the system, the way it's so tightly controlled on such a massive scale. I mean, for me, it was absolutely mind-blowing to find out how widespread it was. Did you actually experience that feeling too?
I did, yeah. It just completely shook the foundations of my world when everything started to make sense to me. And it was largely as a result of reading Icke's books. And let me say, I'm well aware that people have very divided opinions on David Icke. There's a lot of people that will tell you he's some kind of shill or some kind of agent or some kind of plant. There are other people that insist he's genuine. There are others who will say, yes, 90% of what he puts out is pure truth, but this thing about the reptilian shapeshifters is a step too far, and he puts it in there to kind of destroy his own credibility. Whatever your view is on the guy, as you pointed out, he has woken up so many people and set so many individuals on their own personal path towards truth-seeking. So if he is an agent, I struggle to understand what the value would have been in putting him out there on some kind of mission, because I'm now engaged on my journey. I'm putting books out there. I'm doing public talks. I'm doing radio shows and podcasts. I know for a fact that my work has woken up hundreds, possibly thousands of people. And I know this because they get in touch to tell me every single day. When I log into my emails, I get messages from people saying, thank you for your work. It's enabled me to see things so much more clearly. I now look at the music industry and life in general in a completely different way, thanks to the information you've put out. And I don't mention that to big myself up or put myself on a pedestal or anything like that. I'm just communicating the fact that I've been able to wake up a whole bunch of people as a result of having been woken up myself by the work of David Icke. And how many more hundreds of thousands of people do you think there are that have got a similar story to tell? So I don't know, what people's perceptions are of this guy, but I'm just saying that the incredible monumental effect he's had in engaging large numbers of people on this path towards truth is completely colossal.
Absolutely. And I had the privilege of meeting him personally, and I was sat next to him in awe, not because I was like some, starstruck person, but I was actually thinking, this guy is going to be remembered in thousands of years' time. This is a man who's going to change the way that humanity actually perceives this reality and starts to take back our reality. So obviously the music industry is a very fundamental part of life today in the Western modern world. And so what would you say, how influential is it, and what have they been doing, obviously, on your journey? And I know that's a sweeping statement because your books are about it in detail, but I just want to maybe step up to how you started to find out what, how significant it was and how it's where you've got to now, what level it's at now.
Well, I kind of worked backwards. I sort of back-engineered the whole thing. So I came into my research looking at relatively recent music videos from current-day artists, contemporary artists, the likes of Beyonce, Rihanna, Lady Gaga, Jay-Z, Kanye West, Miley Cyrus, Katy Perry, Kesha, Taylor Swift, these kind of individuals. And I spent a lot of time looking at a website called vigilanttcitizen.com. And again, a lot of people will say that the guy that runs this site is some kind of agent, some sort of disinfo guy on some sort of mission. I think every researcher gets that, to be honest. And if you're not getting those kind of accusations, you're not making an impact the way you should be. I get those accusations leveled at me. According to certain individuals, I'm a Freemason, I'm a Satanist, a devil worshipper, an MI6 agent. So I just wear them all as badges of honor. So I'm just pointing out that a lot of people, when they hear the name Vigilant Citizen, their mind may well go to accusations of this guy putting out disinfo or whatever. But I would say that, again, this was a very invaluable source of information for me, and it got me able to recognize occult symbolism as it's used in music videos and stage shows at the likes of the US Super Bowl, the Grammys, the MTV Awards, that kind of thing. So I got trained in looking out for things like pyramids, depictions of the all-seeing eye, depictions of the so-called 666 sign, which is this one, the Baphomet horned hand sign, this one that you see all over the place, mind control symbolism, imagery that pertains to trauma-based mind control programming, things like shattered mirrors, things like teddy bears and dolls with mutilated limbs, with eyes missing. They're all symbolizing the shattered innocence of youth that child victims of mind control and satanic ritual abuse experience. And people might be asking themselves, what the hell has all this got to do with music videos? Well, you actually see all this symbolism and all this imagery in a whole load of videos, promotional photographs, sleeve designs, stage shows from artists like the ones I've just mentioned. So I started out thinking, what's all this stuff doing in these videos? And why are all these artists involved? Thinking it was a relatively recent phenomenon that had been going on probably just since the 2000s. And as I delved further into it and threw myself down the rabbit hole, so to speak, as you'll well know, Joe, you start researching one subject and it dovetails off into another one, and that leads somewhere else. Before you know it, you've got about 15 windows open on your laptop and you're darting between them to cross-reference material. You get led to different researchers' work. They recommend other YouTube videos that you watch, and you're suddenly drowning in this tidal wave of information. And that's the way it was with me. And I came to realize that when it comes to the corruption and the debasement of the corporate music industry, you've got to go all the way back to the very start, to its very instigation. So I found myself going back through the 1990s, through the 1980s, looking at 1980s pop videos and going, my God, the same symbolism is in Madness and Adam and the Ants and Duran Duran and the Eurythmics videos from the 1980s, as you see in Katy Perry and Lady Gaga videos from 2008. Then I found myself going back into the 70s, then into the 1960s big time. I mean, I could talk about the 1960s and the way that decade was used for social engineering and culture control for days. When you get into the whole hippie counterculture scene and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all that stuff. But it goes back even further. You find yourself going to the 1950s, the likes of Elvis Presley, Cliff Richard, the birth of rock and roll with Bill Haley and the Comets and all of that. And you come to realize that in actual fact, the very reason for these industries being set up in the first place is because of the incredible opportunities that they offer to mind control large numbers of people and shape and dictate their value systems, their beliefs, and their perceptions. And the great thing about doing it through entertainment is, of course, nobody is expecting to be mind controlled, to be programmed and winding from a hard day at work by watching a pop video from one of their favorite artists, or going to the cinema and going into 2 hours of mindless escapism through some Hollywood blockbuster, or putting on the telly, putting their feet up for a couple of hours before they go to bed, before they've got to get up in the morning and do it all over again. People just think they're unwinding and escaping the daily pressures of their lives, and that's how they get you, because you're off guard. And all this programming that is being achieved through the entertainment industry is going straight into the subconscious mind of the collective masses watching it. Nobody realizes it's going on. And there's even a brilliant cherry on the cake on top of all of that, which is, from the point of view of the mind controllers, the social engineers, people are paying for their own mind control. They're paying to go and see a film. They're paying to go and see their favorite band. They're being brainwashed, and they're paying for it. It's a work of genius from their point of view when you really break it down like that. My research showed me that this infiltration, this corruption goes all the way back to the very start of the music industry. And when you speak to researchers into the Hollywood film industry, they tell you the same thing about that. It would appear the very reason for that particular institution being set up was because of the tremendous opportunities offered to mind control large numbers of people, and particularly children, through movies. Mm-hmm. So we know that there are dark occult practitioners presiding over these industries at the very upper levels, these are the ones that like to keep themselves in the shadows. They're the ones whose names we don't generally get to hear about. But there have been so many insiders and whistleblowers that have been a part of these industries that have come forward and spoken of the occult ritualistic activity that goes on behind the scenes involving all the key players in these industries, that we now know it to be very different to what we see on the glossy surface of it all.
Yeah, and it is really hard to get your head around, because if you have the perception of, you see a pop star and you like their image and you like the music and you idolise them, and your friends do, and you feel cool for following them, because we've all been there when you were doing it with your rap stuff when you was younger, and I was doing it with your main 1980s new agey stuff, and it's like what was really shocking is that what's shown isn't actually what's really going on behind the scenes, and the subliminal images and the symbolism that goes straight through to the subconscious mind is a bit that, as a hypnotherapist, I understood it, but other people think, don't be ridiculous, it's just imagery, it's just cool imagery.
Well, I used to defend hip-hop music, and particularly the genre of it known as gangster rap, which I was into big time in the 90s, and I was playing it out in clubs and on the radio. And if somebody had said to me then, this stuff is actually having a mind-controlling effect on the people that listen to it on a cumulative basis. So the more of this stuff you get exposed to, the more it builds up certain ideas and values and perceptions in your mind, I would have told you were crazy and to get out of my face, because I was having none of it. I was an apologist for that kind of music. But here I am all these years later with the benefit of maturity, hindsight, a little bit of dignity that is supposed to come with getting older. You're not supposed to act the same way at 45 as you did at 25. And if you are, you've probably missed a few lessons about what life is trying to teach you. You're supposed to grow. You're supposed to evolve. And particularly when you've got kids of your own, when you've got a family, you start to take on a responsibility that you probably didn't have in your younger years, or at least you should. So now I can absolutely understand that particular music and so many other genres like it have been used to sow value systems into the minds of the people that are lapping it all up. That's what it's used for. They have all these different agendas and they roll them out at different times, aimed at different demographics, but the purpose is always the same: to mind control large numbers of people, basically. I had a reader of one of my books get in touch with me recently, and he said that he's given it some thought and he thinks they've got different styles of music and different fashions and different trends to go with it, waiting to be rolled out at different times. And when they deem the social circumstances to be appropriate, they will kickstart this new kind of movement and cultural phenomenon and get it off the ground. And it can be seen to have come from one of these agencies that make these kind of things happen. So he said, in the 60s, you had the psychedelic rock scene that went hand in hand with the whole counterculture ethos that was happening at that particular time. Then in the 70s, you had rock music, progressive rock, going into punk and new wave towards the end of the decade. Then in the 80s, you had the new romantic thing. You had synth pop. Towards the end of that decade, you had electronic dance music starting to come in via the UK's acid house scene, which I go into big time in this new book, talking about how that whole scene was utterly manipulated and made to happen by certain interested parties. Then going into the 90s, you had drum and bass, you had all these spin-offs of house music, techno and trance and all the rest of it. In the 2000s, you've got whatever the hell you call the music that's out there today. And I sound like my dad when I say that, but I don't listen to a whole load of contemporary music now, apart from for research purposes. And the guy was making the point that with each of these scenes, where large numbers of people get swept up in its wake and where they start dressing a certain way, acting a certain way, speaking a certain way, buying certain fashion brands, adopting certain lifestyle habits and mannerisms, all of that would have been made to happen, because these kind of things are not left to chance. These occultists that we have running the show don't leave it to random chance as to which acts get big and which cultural phenomena take off and which fads and trends everyone gets caught up in. That's what social engineering and culture creation is. And that has formed a big part of the research that has gone into this latest book of mine.
And there's two angles, and this pretty much in your first book, these two questions are aimed at. So one thing that you identified as you delved deeper was the link to military backgrounds of a lot of people who were actually influential in the pop scenes. And another one was the influence or the use of drugs in each part of these scenes that we're breaking out to, isn't it?
Yeah, well, another part of the idea that you had all these musical genres and all these fashions and trends ready to go is the fact that each of these movements seemed to have its own drug to go with it. So when you think of the 60s counterculture scene, it was all about LSD primarily. And there's been so much documentary evidence now which has come available to prove that most of the LSD that was on the scene in California during the hippie heyday was placed there directly by agents of the CIA. And in many cases, some of the key players on the music scene, such as the group The Grateful Dead, were actual CIA agents. It's known that that group was a creation of the CIA. You've also got the fact that the tour manager of the Grateful Dead, Alan Trist, his father, Eric Trist, was one of the founding members of the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London, which is all about mind control and social engineering. Then another two of the members of the Grateful Dead also just happened to be members of the Bohemian Club, Bohemian Grove, and there's connections going into Skull and Bones coming out of Yale University as well. So that group is in it up to their necks, and they were key players on that scene and very influential in getting LSD out to all the kids that were listening to this music. And that went hand in hand with characters like Ken Kesey and his Merry Pranksters and Dr. Timothy Leary, who were all connected to the CIA on the LSD front. There were other drugs around at the time as well, peyote, mescaline, lots of dope, but LSD was primarily the one. Then as you went forward into the 70s, cocaine started to become very popular in rock music. You had the punk and new wave thing, and heroin became quite chic within that scene. Then as you progressed through the 80s, cocaine never really went away. Weed, cannabis was always there on the reggae scene, and it became a big part of the hip-hop scene. Then towards the end of the 1980s, with the acid house movement that kicked off in the UK, and we're on the 30th anniversary of that right now, because 1988 was dubbed the second summer of love. And there's a clue in the title there, because they're kind of telling you that what they did in the 60s with the whole counterculture hippie thing, they rebooted and rolled out to a whole new generation on the other side of the Atlantic 21 years later. But the tactics were all the same. So instead of LSD on this scene, you suddenly had ecstasy, MDMA. And as the 90s rolled forward and went into the 2000s, you started to hear MDMA getting name checks on hip-hop records. So the likes of Dr. Dre and Eminem and Missy Elliott and Notorious B.I.G. are starting to talk about ecstasy, MDMA, in their records, in their raps. And that paved the way for the explosion of what's come to be known as EDM, or electronic dance music, in the United States, which kicked off around about 2008. And that whole scene is very closely associated with what's known as Molly, which is kind of a new name for the powdered or capsuled form of MDMA ecstasy. So the nickname is Molly. You started to get dance music records, such as this one by Cedric Gervais, this French DJ producer, that put out a record simply called Molly. And you had Madonna getting up there at the Ultra Music Festival in Miami and shouting out to all the assembled clubbers, has anyone seen Molly? I'm looking for Molly. So they're popularizing this drug on that scene. And as you say, every one of these movements targeted to different generations has its own narcotic of choice to go with it. With dance music, this is a subject that I've visited in 2 chapters in the new book. You've got quite a deadly and toxic combination, I would suggest, of music which is digital and electronic in its base form. So it's all about sound frequencies. There's nothing organic about it in terms of musicians playing instruments. All this music is created on computers, and these producers are dealing in sound frequencies and sound waves. And if you are somebody with malevolent intent that doesn't necessarily have the best interests of those that are going to be hearing this music at heart, there are all kinds of things that you could be baking and cooking into these productions on a sound frequency level, because we know that sound is used for healing, in many cases. There are therapy centers that specialize in using sound to treat all kinds of disorders and medical conditions, and exposure to favorite forms of music has been known to wake people out of prolonged comas. It has incredibly powerful and beneficial effects if it's in the hands of benevolent users and if the right kind of frequencies are being used. But if that's the case and it can have that effect, then the opposite is also true. And if you have controllers handling this stuff with malevolent intent that want to cause harm, then they can use sound frequencies and productions to achieve just that. And there's so much evidence to show that the electronic dance music scene has been steered off in certain desired directions by this very same occult priest class of practitioners that we're talking about. There are clues in the symbolism that's now going into electronic dance music festivals big time. The way the festivals are named, the images that are flashed up there on these massive screens that are getting absorbed into the subconscious of hundreds of thousands of people that attend these events. When you couple that with the fact that so many of the kids that go to these dance festivals and these events, these clubbing events, are off their tits on ecstasy or other drugs, now you've got a situation where they're very open to being attacked on a psychic level through sound frequency and through the neurological pathways of their brains being rewired by the chemical constituents of these drugs that they're on. So again, if you've got a bunch of controllers that want to harness this whole scenario for malevolent aims, then these kids that are going and absorbing all this stuff are sitting ducks for this type of manipulation. And that's what I feel has been going on for a good few years now on this scene.
Yeah, and I'm thinking at the minute, I'm thinking of friends who have never looked into any of this. They just like the pop scene and they think this is just like nutty conspiracy theory. But when you actually start to look at, I've got your first book here. This is some work in this, and you're just about to publish the second book, aren't you? So if you start to look at this, it's undeniable. Fantastic.
Volume 2.
Yeah. And when people do look the information that Mark's gathered and pulled together, or even if you just go on YouTube and type in the word Satanism in the music industry, there's video after video after video giving proof that there's something in it. There's too much going on for there not to be something in what you've been researching.
Well, that's absolutely true. And when I first started out on this path of research, I've got to say, in the early days, I had lots of moments of doubt. And I had to reach a point where, having done the research and having absorbed all this information, I had to decide whether I was going to go public with this and stake my reputation and put my name to it and expose this information for the benefit of others. And I came to comprehend that when you take on an understanding of truth, you also take on a responsibility to communicate that to others in the most effective way that you can. So I reached a point probably around 2011, I guess, where I decided that I had to use the opportunities that were available to me to start communicating what I had learned to other people, to at least give others the opportunity to take on this information if they chose to. You can't ever shove it down people's throats, nor should you. You just make the information available for those that choose to look at it. Once you've put the information out there, you've discharged your personal responsibility, and the onus and the emphasis is now on other individuals to choose to look at it or not. So I made the decision to do that. But I've got to say, there were lots of moments of doubt in those early years where I would say to myself, have I got this correct? Am I absolutely sure that this is the right interpretation for all this stuff? And every time I had one of those doubts, something would come along to completely validate it. So it would be synchronicity or synchromysticism, whatever name you want to put on it, at work. But it would be the same day. So I would be worrying in the morning about something that I'd stated publicly, and I'd be thinking, I hope I've got that right, and can that really be the case? And then I would get a video land in my inbox or an email from some industry insider later that day to say, I felt I needed to reach out to you and share this information with you. And the information they would share would completely validate what I myself had already said earlier that day. And this kept happening. And things reached the point where I realized that, yes, I absolutely have got this correct. Again, I'm not bigging myself up by saying that. I'm just saying that I've been led in the correct and appropriate directions to be able to piece all this stuff together. And I receive constant confirmations and validations that this stuff is absolutely real. And I'm far from the only researcher putting this stuff out there. I'm in a very privileged position in that I've done radio shows. I'm reasonably well known, I guess, in certain circles in the music industry. And so I guess there's a certain amount of credibility to me speaking about this stuff because I can be seen as somebody that has worked within the industry versus maybe some random guy that just decides to make YouTube videos that nobody's ever heard of before. So I recognize that I'm in that kind of influential position and I try to use it responsibly. But there are many other people putting this type of information out there, and anyone who thinks I'm crazy and I'm just pulling this stuff out of the ether or doing it for the money, which is an accusation I get, you would be surprised at my financial situation. Anyone who thinks I do this for the money, you've got to be mad. Or people think you do it to be popular or to be controversial or to get noticed, whatever. Again, if you dealt with some of the stuff that I have to deal with in response to the information I put out, let's see how long you'd last, people that come with those kind of accusations. But there are many other people putting this stuff out there. So like I say, if you think I'm crazy, go online, do a bit of research, watch some videos, look at some blog sites, look at some documentaries, and just look at the music videos themselves and look at some of these promotional pictures that you get coming out with some of these artists. And all the symbolism that I and other people speak of is right there in your face for you to see if you've got the eyes to see it and the mind to want to understand it. It's amazing what we do miss, because I was looking back over these 1980s pop videos and I document many of these in the new book. I break it down video by video and I explain to people what they should be looking for. The great thing about it is all these videos are available on YouTube. So you can go back and watch them anytime you want, and they're right there, and you can see all the same stuff. Masonic, checkerboard, black and white floors that you find in Masonic temples, symbolizing duality and base consciousness. Some of these videos were even filmed in Masonic temples, like Adam and the Ants, Prince Charming. They're making no bones about it. There are depictions of dissociation, which is linked again to mind control programming, multiple personality disorder. You see many of these artists morphing into different kind of identities on the pop music videos. And when you understand what's going on, it's right there in plain sight for you to see. So it's all out there. And anyone that truly wants to gain an understanding of this stuff and realize how we've all been duped, we've all been mind controlled, we've all been taken for suckers and mugs, the information is right there at your disposal should you choose to look at it.
Yeah, what's quite interesting is my guest last week, Mary Rodwell, she's gone a different route where it's looking at star children, indigo children, all these extrasensory gifts coming into these children now. And she was mentioning, just like I was, how when we start to doubt, we get something else, or the universe just seems to put right in front of us exactly the right thing at the right time. It's like there's divine intervention going on. And nearly everybody I speak to is choosing, I'm saying choosing because on some level we must have chosen to put this stuff out there, because I agree with what you're saying, Mark. It's not comfortable to talk about satanic ritual abuse. That's one of the subject areas that I cover on a lot of the shows. It's uncomfortable. It's because I know so many people think it's crazy, or they don't want to look at it, or it's too scary or too fearful. But the only way we can change what has been going on, especially with the subliminal stuff, is to look at it. And it's really great that you're putting the detail in what's in the videos, because once you can see it, it doesn't have the same power over you, does it?
Well, absolutely. You break the spell. And one thing that a lot of people say to me when they've looked at my work and the work of other similar researchers is, I can't enjoy this music anymore. They say, I can't enjoy these bands. I used to love the Rolling Stones, they'll say, or I used to love the Doors or the Beatles or David Bowie, and I can't listen to that stuff anymore. And I say to them, well, you don't need to chuck out all that music, because although we know that many of these bands were controlled and they're not who you thought they were, and this is where we get into the world of lifetime actors. Maybe we can touch on that briefly at some point, but I go into lifetime actors big time in the book, and that's all linked to cultural creation. So when you discover who many of these bands are, think of the Grateful Dead, who I mentioned earlier, with links to the CIA, Bohemian Grove, Skull and Bones. You can understand now that these groups did not evolve organically. They weren't just a bunch of guys that got together and formed a band and they crossed their fingers for good luck, played a few gigs and worked really hard, and they just happened to make it against all the odds. It doesn't work that way. Any of these bands that are placed there as A-listers, as household names that have that kind of influence on culture have been placed there. They've had their careers facilitated for them. But they still make great music. So, the tunes are incredible. It's some of the best music that's out there. So you can understand that these groups were controlled. You can understand that they were operating to agendas, but you can still enjoy the music. Once you have that understanding, it's no longer having that controlling effect on you on a subliminal level. And it's the same thing with these music videos. So when you learn to spot all this symbolism, whereas previously it would have been going straight into your subconscious mind and it would have been buried away there, and you never know when that stuff can come out. Sometimes it comes out in dreams, but other times it just comes out in your attitudes towards things, your perceptions of other people, your perceptions of situations, your cultural viewpoints. And you never really understand where all this stuff has come from. It's been absorbed into your subconscious, often at a much earlier date, and it's now doing its work, and it's really shaping who you are and the way you think. But when you learn what to look for, like I say, you break that spell. And I always say it's like going to watch a stage conjurer or an illusionist. You can think of Darren Brown or David Blaine, and they perform these tricks that are seemingly impossible. And you think, how the hell did they do that? But occasionally they will kind of break the ranks and tell you how they did it. So Darren Brown's done a few shows. He doesn't tell you how he does all his stuff, but every now and again he will show you how he achieves something. And often it's to do with mind control. He explains how he subliminally affected people's perceptions. And he shows you all these little signs and symbols that he placed around the place that people have been absorbing. And when he breaks it down for you and you can see how it was done, you go, oh, right, of course, that's how it was achieved. Now, if you go and see Darren Brown a year later and he does that same trick on stage, you're going to say to yourself, I know how he does this. There's no magic here at all. It's all sleight of hand and illusion. I know how he does it because it's been explained. It's been broken down. He's no longer going to trick you in that same way. And that's the same process we're dealing with here. When you learn what to look for in these stage shows, in these videos, when you learn what all these signs and symbols and sigils are all about, what they're designed to do, you've broken the spell. You can be free. You can enjoy the music if you choose to, but now you know who these people are, what they come from, and what the industry that they work for represents. So that's why I think it's so important to break down bit by bit in very easily digestible ways the methods that are used against us. That's what my work is all about, and that's what many other researchers do a great job of doing, particularly Vigilant Citizen, I have to say.
I mean, if you look at the word occult, it means hidden knowledge, and occultism is heavily used. So Anton LaVey and Aleister Crowley, they were highly acclaimed or, respected by a lot of people in the music industry, weren't they? And I think for you layperson who doesn't know about occultism, because we've been intentionally steered away from it as a society, as if that's ridiculous, that doesn't actually happen. And that's how they've got through subliminally, really, isn't it?
It is, yeah. They're just achieving all this stuff that the average person would never imagine is going into works of popular culture. And again, that's one of the ingenious things about it. And a lot of people scoff at this type of information when you first offer it to them. And I guess I can understand that, because I would have done myself many years ago. I actually spent many years as a quite bitter atheist. And this was as a result of having gone into an evangelical Christian church for 4 years, having been inducted into it. I actually cover this story in the new book because, believe it or not, it's tied to the chapter that I've got on acid house. And it focuses on that period in the late 80s as it gave way to the 90s, when I believe there was something of a consciousness shift happening, which lots of people were able to tap into. And I think it was happening round about the time of 1989, when we saw all these major changes in the world, such as the collapse of communism and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the breakup of all these previously communist Eastern Bloc nations in Europe. And then you had the release of Nelson Mandela in 1990. Sorry, folks, from the Mandela effect, but he didn't die in jail. He was actually released in 1990, and I remember it. So you had all these incredible world-changing events happening as the 80s gave way to the 90s. And I think there was something happening. There was some kind of shift. And I believe that I was tapping into it at the time. And like I say, I relate the story in the book because there's many other people that I've spoken to that have said round about 1989, 1990, they started feeling differently about life and reality themselves, but they couldn't quite put their finger on what it was. And I'm proposing in the book that the UK's acid house scene that is supposed to have come along at the tail end of 1987 and is supposed to have happened completely organically. It was as a result, we're told, of these 4 London DJs that went out to Ibiza for Paul Oakenfold's birthday, and they partied at Amnesia. They listened to all these sounds that were being played by this DJ Alfredo, who's mixing up all these different, diverse, eclectic kind of sounds, and they brought that whole spirit and that whole vibe, that whole freedom approach to music back to London and started up all these acid house clubs. I mean, that's really breaking it down to the lowest common denominator, and I'm probably digressing a bit here, but I'm just trying to make the point that I think that whole scene was deliberately kick-started at that time because these shifts in consciousness that were occurring were known to be coming. And rather than letting that evolve in its own natural organic way, the controllers that like to direct and manipulate all events of this kind wanted it to go off in their own desired direction. So they created this whole scene at that time to harness that energy and steer it off in their own selected ways. And I know I'm rambling a bit here. I was trying to get into the story of how I came to be inducted into this evangelical Christian church. So I was feeling all these changes taking place around about 1990, had no idea what was happening, didn't know what to do with it. There was no internet. There was no way of researching all this stuff. And the only person I felt able to speak to about it was an aunt of mine who was a quite zealous Christian. And she interpreted me saying that I felt different about things as a calling from the Lord. So she inducted me into this Christian church, which I attended for the next 4 years, never really fitted in, never really felt comfortable there. And I left at the tail end of those 4 years very disillusioned, very confused, and it actually turned me into an atheist. And I then held an atheistic viewpoint for the next several years. I lapped up the work of Professor Richard Dawkins, believe it or not, who proposed that there is no God, there's no
That's really surprised me that you did that. But it's good to have done that and come out the other side of it as well. Yeah.
Well, exactly. And I got to the point in around about 2007, 2008, which goes back to the story I was relating at the start of the show, where I was reading David Icke's books and I was opening my mind to all these different possibilities. And I came to realize that, of course, there is spirituality. Of course, there is this divine power that people call God. And I realized how deluded and mistaken I'd been for all those years. And that, I think, is actually a healthy process for people to go through. It's a good thing to grow and evolve in that way and not to hold the same viewpoint for your entire life when new information and new evidence and new synchronicities come your way, inviting you to reassess the whole situation. So I can't even remember how I started this whole train of thought, but I'm just making the point that I've been through many different processes in terms of my spirituality and lack of it for many years. And I've grown and I've evolved and I've gone where the information has taken me and where life has taken me. And here I am doing stuff now that I would never have imagined before. I'm sorry, I digress.
It's honestly, this is a free talk show, and it's just like we're just going to talk about you and everything. You know, everything's of interest anyway. It's all relevant, and the train of thought was linked to consciousness shift. So I wanted to just throw something in there because what I'm understanding now with a consciousness shift is we're all remembering who we are as spiritual beings, and this reality, this materialism, matter, is only a consequence of consciousness. It's all created in spirit first, and the etymology of the word sin is to miss the mark, to be off target. And you know, if you look at the pop industry, what they're doing is they're making us focus on materialism. So whether you look at hip hop or the black music scene, it's about what car you've got, what jewelry you're wearing, what watch you've got, or immorality. So again, it's about physicality. So sex and physical, focusing on matter rather than spirituality. And the whole of the industry appears to be aiming to take people away from spirit to off target into materialism.
Well, you certainly see that in what is laughingly referred to as hip-hop now, which is quite tragic for somebody that remembers better days, better times, to look at the way that particular genre has been steered off. But when you look at the lyrical content of records that purport to be hip-hop or so-called R&B urban music now, literally the only things you will hear talked about is partying in the club, let's all go out and get drunk, get lit, get fired up, go off and have sex with whoever you want, do some drugs, go out and buy a load of material stuff, buy fashion brands, buy sneakers, buy gold chains, buy this car, buy this phone. Certain brands even get specific name checks in these records, the actual corporate brands themselves. And the message that young people who only listen to this kind of music get is that life is basically pointless. It's short. You never know when you're going to go. So you might as well just party up, spend your money as soon as you earn it, go and get laid, go to the club. And that's the message for life that people are getting. No hint of spirituality, no hint of anything meaningful, no hint of inspiring people to stand in their personal freedom and recognize that they're inherently sovereign beings, that they have a whole load of power at their disposal if they would only choose to manifest their own reality that they might choose to live in. None of that stuff, none of these great spiritual truths. You've got to look very, very deep beneath the surface to find music that talks about those kind of themes. It is out there. And I showcase this stuff on the podcast that I do called The Sound of Freedom, which is conscious music. A lot of conscious hip-hop, a lot of conscious reggae, and some other styles as well. But these are not records that you'll ever hear on the mainstream radio. They're not records that you'll ever see on video rotation on any of the music channels. You certainly won't hear it ringing off in the club or in bars. This stuff is very well hidden from the surface. So the only messages you get from mainstream music, like I say, are basically satanic when you break it down. And you mention Satanism to a lot of people who maybe haven't researched it, and their mind will go straight to the Christian concept of what Satanism is, which is all about this entity called the devil worship. That is an oversimplification of what ideological Satanism is all about. And I've never taken the devil to be an actual literal entity. It's a personification of the idea of evil and that which goes against all that is good in nature. And God, the divine, if you like. So the word Satan from the original Hebrew and also in the Arabic means enemy or adversary or opposer. And it's indicating that the idea of Satanism opposes creation, that which is good, that which is natural, that which comes from God. So anything that's satanic goes against what is inherently good in nature. And that's what we're witnessing in so much of the music that's out there right now, and also the lifestyles that people are conditioned towards taking on. Because most people, and they would be horrified to hear this, but most people in this world are stuck in a satanic mindset, because their only thought from the minute they get up to the minute they go to bed is what suits me in my life, in the circumstances in which I find myself right now. Not a thought for how their actions and their behaviors might impact on others and have a wider ripple effect on society in general. Just, what do I need? What do I want? What would satisfy me right now? And just appeasing that and going for that and not giving a second thought to anything beyond that. And the kind of records that we now have are absolutely advocating that mindset and that way of thinking. And of course, that's what the controllers want. And it goes in hand with so many other aspects of human society, so many other things that are going on. And I'm always completely aware of the sort of work that I do and the research that I get into is really only one very small part of the big picture of what's going on in this world. You could have a guest on talking about false flag terror events and how those things get staged and what the psychological effect of those is and what the propaganda effect of those is. You could have a guest on talking about food and drink additives, what's going into those, fluoride in the water, vaccines, pharmaceutical drugs, how that's harming human health. You could have a guest on talking about chemtrailing, geoengineering, and these are all very valid subject areas.
Yeah.
They're all very distinct in themselves, but they're all interlinked, and they all fit into this massive, colossal picture of what's really going on in the world. Yeah. And this is why people coming to this information for the first time can get very overwhelmed with it because, like I said earlier, you realize just how deep the whole thing goes. You start researching one area, it leads you off into another, and you realize that ultimately it's all connected. Yeah. And you actually end up redrawing your whole worldview, starting again with a blank sheet of paper, forgetting everything that you've been conditioned and entrained to believe throughout your entire life, through the educational system, through what government ministers tell you, through what the mainstream media tells you, and starting all over again from scratch.
Yes. I've actually had guests on covering all the subject areas except geoengineering. That's on my list to bring somebody on to talk about that. But there's a couple of things I want to just throw in there. I agree with you about people being in, when you call a satanic mindset, it's service to self. But there's a massive consciousness shift going on right now. And a really great example of that is a statistic I saw in America right now. Veganism is increased by 600% last year. Okay. Wow. So if you think about, if you go in the supermarkets now, it's all about supply and demand. They're all putting vegan options in because demand's there. And instead of being the pariah and the weird one, people still look at you like you've got two heads some places you go, but it's becoming more commonplace right now. And this is because people are starting to see other beings and have compassion and love for these other beings and not want to contribute to the insanity. So I do believe there's a massive consciousness shift, and it would be even greater if we hadn't been mind controlled and subliminally had all this materialism and immorality. And I don't want to sound like I'm some kind of prude, but when you actually look at it, and prime example, I want to see what your view is on this one, Miley Cyrus. Yeah, little girl put out through Disney, all, this love and light kind of thing, and then all of a sudden becomes a pop star, and the immorality that's displayed there is like complete opposite of what she was portrayed as a child. What are your views on that example?
That's the way they get you so often. They start off by putting a celebrity into the public spotlight with a particular persona. And with Disney, it's always the same because Disney have got previous in this. And the Disney Corporation is very far from the nice, family-friendly, cuddly, pleasant image that they like to portray of themselves on the surface. There's a researcher called Carl James who did a presentation last year on the dark side of Disney, and I'd certainly recommend anyone that doesn't yet understand the true nature of the Disney Corporation to have a look at that presentation. I think it's on YouTube. So he broke down what Disney is really all about and what some of their affiliations have been, some of the occult groups they've been connected with, the military-industrial complex, military intelligence. They've worked hand in hand with all these types of organizations. And you might like to ask yourself why an organization that's supposed to be all about children's entertainment has links with all these kind of nefarious organizations. So Disney is actually a very dark, satanic organization, and it's been very key in mind controlling children over the decades. There are suspicions among some researchers that many of their facilities are actually used to mind control victims of satanic ritual abuse. And when it comes to many of the stars that they serve up, such as Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake, and Miley Cyrus, they start off being presented as being these wholesome girl next door types. In the case of Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Miley Cyrus, who started out as Hannah Montana. So they're kid friendly. So parents see these characters and they think, oh, this seems appropriate, this seems nice, I'll let my kids watch this. Hannah Montana seems like a nice girl. And so the kids become fans of Miley Cyrus. They get to know who she is through this persona. And then there comes a point where they suddenly switch. And they go from being this wholesome girl next door type to being these full-on pornographic satanic sluts, which is the persona that they then take on. Look at what Miley Cyrus has been doing on stage over the past few years. There was one video where she was dressed as a baby and she's touching herself up. I mean, how sick is that? What a mix of imagery we're getting there. And her stage shows are just straight out. It's like watching a porn show, basically. And there's a time and a place for everything, okay? You know, pornography has its place, and if people want to watch that, that's great, but in the appropriate setting. And I would suggest that an appropriate setting for pornography is not in a show that's going to be watched by a large number of very young kids. The fan base for Miley Cyrus would have been girls from the age of probably 8 or 9 upwards to the early teens. The kind of behavior that she's been displaying on stage is not appropriate for that kind of audience, and it's pretty obvious that she's been used to debase and corrupt the mindsets of these kids that are going to be exposed to all this stuff. It was the same thing with Britney Spears. She went down a similar path. Christina Aguilera the same way, and they often start them out like this. When you think back to Rihanna, when she first emerged, her first record was called If It's Lovin' That You Want, and it was this nice, pleasant, breezy, kind of Caribbean-flavored pop tune, very innocent. Nobody could really object to anything in it. A few years later, she's making records like Bitch Better Have My Money, and she's ripping people's hearts out in videos and toting machine guns and portraying all this dark occult satanic imagery. So that's the way they get you. They start out innocent and pure seeming, and then further down the line they switch them. By that point they've got the fan base gets swept along with whatever their idols and their heroes are doing, and that's the path they end up going down. This is what cultural heroes are all about, and this is why I'm suggesting in the book that it's very dangerous for people to have heroes in celebrities, because we don't really know these people. We think we do, but we're going by their public personas. So whether it's a favorite sports star, whether it's a politician you might admire, whether it's a Hollywood actor that you love, whether it's a musician, whether it's a television presenter, whether it's a supermodel, what you're getting is the glossy public relations version of this individual, the Wikipedia version, the official version of everything. But you don't know who these people are. You don't know where they've come from. You don't know what affiliations they have. You don't know what they're doing in their life away from the spotlight. And you don't know what they're being used for. So when you follow these heroes and you elevate them to godlike status, you're putting yourself in a very dangerous position. When it comes to the electronic dance music scene, it absolutely astounds me the kind of following that some of these producers and DJs have. There's this one guy, Paul Van Dyk, who's a German dance music producer and DJ. And occasionally I go on his Facebook page just to see what shows he's been doing lately and just to keep up with his activities, because I do document him in the book. There's lots to know about this guy. There's lots to know about the symbolism that goes into his stage shows. There's lots to know about the type of festivals that he's selected to perform at. When you look at some of the comments on his fan page, you've got hundreds of thousands of people that are completely starstruck, and they've elevated this guy to literally a godlike status. They're making comments like, you've changed my life, you've saved my life, I follow everything that you do, I would give anything to meet you, I want to bow down at your feet and worship you. These are the kinds of comments that you get from people towards someone that they've never met. They're just going by the public version of them. Very dangerous to give away your own power and to externalize to people that you actually know nothing about. And we've got to get to a stage where we stop having these heroes, because heroes can always disappoint you, and they always do. I've had many people that I've looked up to in my life that have disappointed me. It used to be other DJs. When I was very active as a DJ myself, I would put other DJs and producers up on a pedestal. I would follow their every move, and I would love them up. But I've come to realize that many of these people that I saw as heroes aren't who I thought they were. Then when I got into this whole truth game, I made the mistake of putting certain truth researchers up on the same pedestal.
Oh, that's dangerous in this game.
Well, it sure is. I threw out the DJs, and instead of going to dance festivals and clubs, I started going to truth conferences and meetups and revering these researchers that would be up on stage. And I came to realize that, unfortunately, some of these people aren't who you thought they were either. And there's a couple of very prominent names that have let me down in recent times. I'm not going to mention those names, but it just reinforced to me how you need to be your own hero.
Yeah, I've heard of so many cases of people who are out there who have a large following who seem to be saying the right thing, and then people put them on pedestals, and they're not always what they seem. And I've done it on the spiritual perspective. I put people on spiritual pedestals because I was on this spiritual journey, and it's really disheartening when you think they're the ones that are going to show you the way. And what I've discovered is I'm the one that's going to show me the way, and everybody out there, they're their own saviour. But
it has to be that.
Yeah, it has to be. And I think this is the thing. It's about our sovereignty that's been taken away from us. Everything, like David Icke talks about, the perception deception. It's about giving our power to things external to us. And we bring in the higher frequency, our I am presence consciousness into ourselves. It's an internal job. It's not out there. And I'm concluding that this is a reality that's created from our perceptions. That's why there's such an effort to manage our perceptions through this industry and all the other industries.
Well, that's right. And a case in point when it comes to people externalizing their power to heroes would be Russell Brand. And I mention him in lots of interviews, but the reason I mention him is because he pushes buttons. The mention of his name tends to polarize opinion, and it gets people sitting up and listening. So if that's what it takes, I'll mention his name. So Russell Brand came out a couple of years ago with his whole People's Revolutionary Act. We need a revolution of consciousness, and we need to an egalitarian society and kick out the bankers and all this stuff that he was spouting. And I think it's worth people bearing in mind that Russell Brand is what? He's an actor. And what do actors do? They rehearse scripts and recite them on cue. And that's precisely what he was doing when he appeared on Question Time and Newsnight, and he was saying all the right things. You just mentioned that phrase yourself. These people are often heard to say all the things we want to hear them say. And in America, recently, you've had a similar act coming from Jim Carrey. And a lot of people have been saying, oh, Jim Carrey has woken up. He's talking about consciousness and spirituality and our true nature and all this kind of stuff. Well, Jim Carrey is an actor as well. And when you look at the way the guy behaves, he would appear to be, in my experience, a very mind-controlled actor with lots of different personalities, not just in the film roles that he portrays, but in himself. So these guys are actors. And yet so many people that would claim to be truth seekers and to know better than the masses, the sheeple, they've woken up and they're paying attention to stuff, were externalizing their power to these individuals. And then we had the same thing with Donald Trump when he came along at the end of 2016. A lot of people who I would never have imagined would make these kind of comments were saying, oh, yeah, I know all politicians are corrupt, but this guy is different. He's not one of them. I think he's really going to change things. And here we are a few months down the line, and we can see that he's just another actor, literally playing just another role. So
I've been watching that closely, I look at everything, because one of the things I've been pushing back on that is if he's such a great guy, why is he paying money to Israel, and why are Palestinians still in that largest concentration camp on the planet? So I am very mindful of the things that aren't being achieved, and like making it legal now to buy ivory from Kenya or from one of the African countries. So there are things that definitely are not loving and not highly conscious. The Q stuff that's going on right now, and the appearance of potentially the arrest of high-level paedophiles, I'm watching it because I'm holding my breath in hope that something might happen. And I think one of the things I was just thinking as you was talking about Jim Carrey, same with Russell Brand, you go through levels of, I hope this person really is a good one. And then you start to look beyond it, and you realise that all they're doing is recognising the level of consciousness that humanity's getting in there first so they can steer you off track again. Mm-hmm. And it is a really difficult one, because I have got this heartfelt feeling that as the collective become more conscious, the tipping point's reached, then that momentum, because I do believe love is more powerful than evil and than fear. And once we get to a certain level of people with that higher frequency, that collective is going to steer the reality in a better direction. That's how I feel it's going. And this is why they're doing everything in their power, chemtrails, GMOs, subliminal stuff, everything they possibly can to try and keep us from raising our consciousness.
Well, that's right. I see these people as Pied Pipers. They're there to lead people off in certain desired directions, to keep them away from looking somewhere else or potentially going somewhere else. But really, this world has changed so much so quickly. I don't recognize this world anymore. I'm not that old. But this world has changed so much in my lifetime. Even in the last 20 years, you could take it back to 1998, 20 years ago. Hardly anyone was using the internet then. Not everyone had a mobile phone. You could still phone up a bank or an electricity company and have the phone answered by a human being. You could get in a car and get a road atlas out and work out where you wanted to go by reading a map instead of your car telling you where to go. Everything now is done digitally, electronically. We've got the smart grid system coming online now. We've got wireless technology everywhere. Everything is being shifted towards this kind of transhumanist, AI, futurist society. And it's all happened so quickly. And I just wonder how, excuse me, how we all could have been asleep at the wheel so much to allow all this stuff to creep up on us like a mugger in a dark alley and not see it coming. And look at the state that we're now in society, and look at the burden that those of us that have taken the responsibility to wake up to the reality that we live in and resolve to do something about it. Look at the challenge that we have now taken on, the small number of us that are doing this work, because collectively humanity has not been paying care and attention to what's going on around them. And a ridiculously, absurdly, farcically small number of these occult controllers have managed to dictate and manipulate the lives of billions of other people. You would never have believed it would have been possible if somebody had written this down and posed it as the script of a Hollywood movie. It would be thrown out on the basis that it's too far-fetched and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it does feel like that. It does feel like that.
And yet here we are living in it.
Yeah. The thing that does hearten me, though, is one of the things that David Icke said is that, he's been in this game 20-odd years, 30 years, and he's written 20-odd books. And he's a person that people go to, the whistleblowers like yourself with information in that field, go to you. And he said recently he's seen a shift. If the type and quality of people that are coming to him and the number of people that are actually talking to him in airports or wherever he goes, and it's amazing that the momentum's getting going. And when you've been doing it as long as you have, and you're out there and you get attacked by trolls and you think, why am I doing this, and you feel like the majority of people are not waking up and it seems pointless and it seems too big a task, what I hold on to is the number of people turning vegan, the number of people, citizen reporters now, doing the jobs of journalists that journalists should have been doing, actually calling out the lies within the media. And there's an awful lot, and the internet has changed a massive amount of stuff. Do you agree?
Absolutely, I do. I'm not a fan of technology. I think it's pretty well known that I'm not. Yeah. I'm considered to be quite a Luddite when it comes to technology. This is my phone. That's my smartphone.
That's smart. That's smart having that.
Well, I think it is smart to have one of these, actually. I've had this about 10 years. It's got a cracked screen, but it works for me. Mm-hmm. This, if I can find it, here's my sat-nav. That's what I use. Works for me. So I'm a bit of a Luddite, and I'm very suspicious of technology, and I can see all the ways in which technology is being used to surveil and monitor and control us. But the one exception for which I hold great affection and respect is the internet, because I think that's the one that's backfired on the controllers big time. It was obviously invented as another method of surveillance and control and data gathering, but I think we, the public, the people, have made this particular tool our own in terms of being able to share information empowering, liberating information. And that is what is almost wholly responsible for the number of people we do have in the world today that have taken on a big understanding of truth and of personal freedom and what's really going on. So the internet in so many ways is our friend. And I don't hold out too much hope for many things the way things are going, Joe, as I mentioned to you earlier. If you were chatting to me on another day, maybe I'll be more optimistic about it. But I can say that one thing that does fill me with optimism and hope is the knowledge in my mind that if they try and shut down the internet completely or even massively restrict it and say, you can't look at these sites, we're shutting this down, I think there would be massive public resistance, and I think people would rise up and they would revolt and say, we're not having this. What we need is people standing up about all kinds of things and saying, we're not having this. We're not having smart meters. Nobody is having smart meters. What are you going to do about it? We're saying no. What are you going to do about it? You know, we don't consent to fracking. We don't consent to chemtrailing. None of us are having it. We're not having you in office if you support this. What are you going to do about it? That's what we need.
You know what I think is going to break the back of it to get people, as David Icke says, to get a backbone and get off the backsides. I believe it's when the truth and it's coming out about the paedophilia and the Satanism and paedophilia. Because when humanity understands what has been done to the children of our society, and that is where it's linked across all of these embedded organisations, when they realise the sheer scale of it, the horrific nature of what's going on, and they actually look at it and realise the innocent children have had this done to them, I think that's going to make people get up. But that's what I believe it needs to come out, and even if it's graphic stuff, because people will then, like the internet, they've got an attachment to it. If a society does not look after its children, then what kind of society are you?
Well, it's my belief that people are not inherently evil. Others may disagree, but I think
I agree with you.
Lying at the very root of human nature, the vast majority of people, if they're not psychopaths, if they're not, clinical psychopaths, primary or secondary psychopaths or sociopaths, or they've got narcissistic tendencies, the majority of people are basically want what is good. They don't want war. They don't want conflict. They just want to be with their families. They want to love their children. They want to live freely. They want to do what they enjoy doing. They don't want to cause harm to others. They've been manipulated and coerced into doing that through the lifestyles that they lead, but that's happened without their true knowledge of what's going on. So at the basic core of things, people are not evil and they're not malevolent in their intent. But the controllers have harnessed people's good nature and twisted and distorted it into something else. So I like to think that if large numbers of people did understand what is really going on with institutionalized paedophilia and all this horrific child abuse and satanic ritual abuse that's going on, they would be absolutely outraged and absolutely incensed, particularly the people that have children, particularly the parents. And I like to think that they would rise up and there would be some pretty bloody major changes overnight. But I just wonder what it's going to take to get that level of awareness out to people. We had the Jimmy Savile thing. That was a golden opportunity for the British public to take on a full understanding of the true nature, the true scale of this stuff. That should have led to the shutting down of the BBC. It should.
I think what it was, people couldn't process it. It's this cognitive dissonance. They couldn't believe it was possible. That they thought it was just one bad guy doing it and everyone had just turned a blind eye kind of thing. I don't think they realised or were willing to look at that it's actually intentionally going on amongst a group of lots of high-profile people who are intentionally taking children into that. And it's starting to be drip-fed. And even in the truth movement, there's a lot of people turned away from stuff that's coming out, like the Hampstead children, saying, no, it's not true, and blaming the mother for putting it out there. And, there wasn't a readiness for it. And I think it's been drip, and it's starting to get to the point where there's enough people now in the collective consciousness ready to look at the darker aspects of it, which it's not pleasant, but we've got to see what's going on before we can change it. And it's all linked to the subliminal stuff in the music industry, all of it.
It is, yeah, and we can get back to that shortly. But they do seem to be finding ways of heading off all these revelations as they come out. So the Jimmy Savile thing, as you say, was chalked up generally as, oh, he was just one bad apple and he got away with it. We don't know how he did, but somehow he just did all this stuff in secret for 50 years. But why were people not calling for all the director generals of the BBC, under whose watch this stuff happened, to stand up there and explain how we could have been allowed to get away with this? Why were people not refusing in their mass numbers to pay the TV license fee anymore and say, we're not supporting this disgusting organisation? Then when you had the whole Pizzagate stuff, which emerged round about the time of the US election at the end of 2016, that was a golden opportunity for the American public to take on an understanding of how paedophilia is woven into the very fabric of American political life.
I think that's still rolling out, because the amount of people watching alternative media now who are alluding to Pizzagate, to paedophilia, to Satanism, the amount of times you hear these terms in the alternative media, and you'll watch a video and they'll have 70,000 views within 3 days. So, there's something going on right now that is linked, it's getting out there more and more, and the viewing figures of things like CNN and, the mainstream media, that they're not anywhere near like they're portraying. It's like they play them in airports and public places, gyms and things like that, but actual people are choosing to go onto the internet now to look at the news. Not someone like my dad. My dad still watches BBC and thinks that if it's not on there, I'm just some nutty person who's naive and believes anything.
Oh,
I know. But there's a lot more people choosing to look at things that are resonating, that are actually putting these key words out like Pizzagate, paedophilia, Satanism. And there's too many people coming out with it right now. And I think that we're in a big shift. We're just on the cusp of it, I believe.
They're clearly very afraid of being rumbled. And you can look at some of the comments that some of these key figures have made over the years. There was a comment that David Rockefeller made many, many years ago where, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, we're grateful to the editors of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all these other major media operations for not subjecting us to the spotlight of scrutiny, because without this, we could never have achieved all the things that we have under the radar. It was words to that effect. Then there was a comment that George Bush Sr. made in an interview in the early 90s, I think, where he said words to the effect that if the American public ever found out what we've been doing, they would chase us down the street and string us up from the nearest lamppost. So they know that if we in our mass numbers ever get wise to what they've been doing to us, it's game over. And they're finished overnight. So it's a numbers game. We just got to get those numbers, and
Absolutely.
we've got to get people taking personal responsibility, not just shrugging this stuff off, not writing off those of us that are communicating this as nutters, as crazy, as conspiracy theorists. Grow a backbone, take responsibility for your family, your children, your own future, and face up to what's going on, because humanity is screwed otherwise.
I'm really optimistic, and it sounds crazy because I look at some dark stuff, and I'm optimistic because of the number of people looking at it, because of the high profile, highly intelligent whistleblowers in all sectors of society that are now coming forward, because we're literally at the crossroads. If they do not come forward and speak out, we are screwed. Yeah, we're at that point.
Those of a religious persuasion keep telling us we're in the end times. And I don't really doubt that, because what happens over the next few years, couple of decades maximum, is going to dictate where the whole of the rest of humanity goes from this point forward.
Yeah.
Our generation, we adults alive today, with the ability to take responsibility for our actions, are going to dictate where the human race goes from here.
Yeah.
That is how fundamental this situation is.
Fully agree with you.
What's the choice going to be? It's on us. The emphasis is on us, and the responsibility is on our shoulders.
I believe we can do it. I genuinely believe we. Somebody said this is the most exciting time to be alive, and apparently there are billions of souls queuing up to get here right now because of Yeah, because of the thing that we're going through. And, I believe people like me, people like you, before we came in here, we signed up to let's go into that place and do the hand holding, let's go through our own stuff first. And that's not saying we're any better than anybody else, but I do think there are souls here right now who've signed up not to play the game, but to actually come in and remember who they are and then remind others who they are, help others remember who they are. And I think that's the process we're going through. And it's scary to look at how dark it's been, but what's happening to me as I go through this process, a bit like yourself go through, is there a God, isn't there a God, and come out the other side where I absolutely believe in a divine creator, a Christ consciousness energy that is inherent in every single person.
Well, we're aspects of it.
Absolutely. And, the way showers, whether it was Gandhi, Buddha, Jesus, they were here showing us how we can attain that Christ consciousness. And it's got nothing to do with materialism. It's selflessness. It's pure love. It's service to others. It's compassion. It's gratitude. It's all the higher frequencies that I believe is being played out by the rise of veganism. Yeah. And but if you look at what animals have gone through or are going through right now on this planet, you've got the two polarities living simultaneously side by side right now, the extreme darkness, the extreme light. Yeah? And the pop industry, bringing us back to it, has been one of their main mechanisms to get people to have the apathy, get people to be off target into materialism and immorality.
Yeah, it's got to play its part. Otherwise, it wouldn't have become so big. It wouldn't be affecting so many people. They wouldn't put so many of these pop stars on pedestals and make massive celebrities out of them. They wouldn't put people like Jay-Z and Beyonce together as celebrity couples and Kim Kardashian and Kanye. Better to have two of their stooges and puppets together as one unit that they can use to manipulate people than have them doing it individually. I believe these are arranged relationships. I don't believe for a minute that those relationships come about as a result of them going out dating and sharing a bag of popcorn at the cinema over a nice movie together and falling madly in love. They're made to happen. So we're working back to the music industry now because I know we strayed away from it.
It always happens on my shows.
Let me just pick up on what you were saying there just before we do go back to it about souls queuing up to incarnate into this reality at this time. I saw a talk by Dolores Cannon a few years ago. Are you familiar with her? I've lost your sound, actually.
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, I am familiar with her.
I saw Dolores Cannon at the Glastonbury Symposium a few years ago. She's passed over now, a couple of years ago, I think, but this would have been 4 or 5 years ago. And it was a really inspiring talk. And she was saying that there are so many souls that want to incarnate into physical manifestation in these times because of the incredible opportunities that they offer for a soul's development and growth. And actually, those of us alive today partaking in this reality should consider ourselves to be very privileged to have a seat at the table. And that really kind of jarred me and shook me and spoke to me in a very potent way. And I always remember her words from those few years ago.
See, the way I look at it is I had my 50th birthday recently, and I can't believe that I'm 50 and it's gone in the blink of an eye. I don't feel it, but it's gone in the blink of an eye. Thank you. But the thing is, it's like that. And that's made me think how short life is and how valuable every single second of it is. And whilst we're here, for me, I want to be able to leave a legacy behind beyond my physical presence here. And the legacy is like linked to healing centres and natural healing and communication. These videos that go out, if they only get one person to look at this and change the way they are in this reality, job done for me. That's how I see it. It's not about numbers. It's not about vanity. It's about my sense of purpose is to bring in the higher frequency energy and remind people of the amazing people they are.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, everyone's got a contribution to make. And people's contributions can be different. My dad, you mentioned yours a while back. My dad is someone that got me on this path, as I say. He encouraged me to think outside the box, not be afraid to be different. But he's very frustrated and he's very regretful that he didn't wake up himself sooner. So he's 78 now. And it was only really in his early 70s that he started paying attention to stuff and really understanding the whole picture. And I know that he's very regretful that he didn't do more in his younger years. and he's spoken to me about it. And I've said, well, maybe your contribution was getting me on this path so that I can be doing my work and getting my stuff out, and I can be reaching people in my way. And I needed that kickstart myself from you. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this. Yeah. That could be his contribution. That was what he was always intended to do. And it's very different to other people's contributions. And you might feel that it's quite minimal, but you can underestimate the effect that your contribution is having. You never really know how many people you're reaching and how many ripples you're creating.
Yeah. It's all a piece of the puzzle. And I say to clients when we talk about things like energies like regret and worry, it's like sitting in a rocking chair. You can rock backwards and forwards, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And regretting, there's no point to that frequency, to that energy, because you can't undo what's been done. And it's about valuing the moment of now. And, you know, this is the thing, is we lose ourselves to the future and the past. And, you know, not trying to sound like, you know, the Eckhart Tolle power of now stuff. It is actually true. If you look at it, the only thing that's real is right now. And it's these moments. This is where we change the reality in the present moment. And everything is engineered to steer us off to the future or behind and not keep us present. And, you know, if the industry, the pop industry, was actually focused on getting us present, having higher loving frequencies put into our energy fields, into our biological systems, we'd be healthy, we'd be positive, we'd be creating. This is what they don't want. And this is what it's up to us to start to bring that back in.
Absolutely. And we can bring this back round to the music industry now, if you like, and talk about some specifics, because I know we've strayed a bit there. But in the new book, I'm talking about how sound frequencies are used, as I mentioned, how social engineering gets done, and what all these lifetime actors and these false idols and heroes that are given to us are really all about. I do get into Satanism in music, in the sense that if you mention Satanism to the average person in relation to the music industry, their mind will probably go to the genres of heavy metal and heavy rock, because these are the ones that are most closely associated with so-called devil worship and dark occult practices. Yeah. And to a very large extent, that is the case in those genres. And in one of the chapters, I examine some of these very dark acts that portray these ritualistic sort of stage shows. And I'm asking the question, is this all hype and controversy, and are they doing it just to get noticed and to win a fan base? Or are these genuine practitioners of these dark arts that are into occult stuff, and this is their way of expressing it, and they're having this very harmful effect on those that lap up the music? And I honestly think it's a bit of both. And I've taken advice from a lot of fans of this genre who are quite switched on, you know, very intelligent people. They love the music, but they're able to view it from a detached perspective. And they've said to me that there are some groups that do it just for the shock value, but there are other groups that really are into these practices, and this is their way of putting it forward. And I mentioned a group called Coven, going way back to the late 1960s. They were more of a psychedelic rock act than a heavy metal band, but there seemed to be something of a precursor to those genres because of the sort of stuff that went into their lyrics and their stage shows. And they put out an album where the cover depicts an actual black mass witchcraft going on, where you've got the lead singer of the group, known as Jinx Dawson, lying naked on a pentagram on an altar, surrounded by all these priests and witches performing this ritual. And some of the tracks on the album are said to contain actual black masses committed to vinyl. And there's an interview that I highlighted in the book with this Jinx Dawson. And she talks about her bloodline and the ancestry that she comes from. And it's basically a long-running family of witches and sorcerers and dark magicians. And they've got connections going into all these dark occult secret societies, Yale and Harvard, all these academic institutions, links going into government and the military and military intelligence and all this kind of stuff. And you read the interview and you think, why would somebody with that kind of ancestry and those kind of so-called elite links want to come out as the singer in a rock group, if not to purposely have a controlling influence on the thousands or millions of fans that are going to listen to this music? Yeah. Another thing that really surprised me in research for the book is I've got a chapter on punk and new wave, those scenes that came out in the late 1970s. And when you look into the family backgrounds of so many of the musicians from these scenes, you find links going back into military intelligence, the CIA, the FBI, MI6, the NSA, the Pentagon, links again going into Skull and Bones, the Bohemian Club, the Century Club, the Church of Satan, Scientology, all this kind of stuff, links to US presidents, links to royalty. And again, you think of these musicians, they're playing in these dark, dingy, gritty, grotty, spit and sawdust kind of venues with sweat everywhere and beer being thrown and people spitting. And you think, if these people come from basically elite bloodline backgrounds and their fathers and grandfathers worked for presidents and in Ivy League universities and stuff, what are they doing in these bands, in these horrible clubs and these horrible grotty venues? You know, if it's not that they've been placed there and they're on a mission and they're fulfilling an agenda, having been commissioned by these groups that they come out of and these affiliations that they have. And that's what we're seeing time and time again. The industry being used and many of the key players that we get presented to us to have this controlling effect on people. There's one particular family that had a major influence over the way the whole punk and new wave scene evolved, and that is the Copeland family, the patriarch of which was Miles Copeland Sr., who was a quite legendary CIA agent, a career guy that had a very long-running career with the CIA. He was posted in many different parts of the world, and he held key roles in many sort of political coups and very significant events that happened. And this guy had 3 sons, all of whom went to work in the music industry. So the main son was Miles Copeland Jr., not a very imaginative name coming from the father, but he was put to use as a record industry executive and band manager. Then you had his brother Ian Copeland, who ran a management and booking agency for many of the bands that came through that new wave scene. And then you had the third brother, who was Stuart Copeland, who was the drummer in the group The Police. And not only did the Copeland family completely control the career of The Police, but they were responsible for developing the careers of virtually all the other key players in that early punk and new wave scene that came out of both the US and the UK. So this one family had a major influence on the way that whole genre developed and all the acts that became popular. And you don't have to look very far to discover those links going directly back to the CIA. And that's just one example coming out of those genres. Time and time again, you find out that the fathers or the grandfathers, when you do the digging, had connections to military intelligence, the military-industrial complex, or the establishment in some way or form. And people really need to start asking themselves why this is. Because I would have expected the fathers and the grandfathers of musicians in rock bands and punk bands to have been miners, dockers, construction workers, lorry drivers, that kind of thing, working class jobs. And yet they're coming out of Ivy League establishments. Why is that, if there's not more to know about who these people really are and what their agenda is?
Yeah, and that's what really, I think when I started to look at this stuff, I knew that it was sort of going on before I saw your presentation, probably about 4 years ago now in Hull. And I was really shocked at how deep and intentional it was. So it wasn't like, coincidental. It was like a proper strategy. And I know Goebbels was talking about how movies were so influential on the propaganda that they put out, and they'd hit on it then, hadn't they? And then they realised that the anything that has a trend or entertains people is the opportunity to go into the subliminal part of the brain, isn't it?
That's right. That dovetails into the world of lifetime actors, who are presented to us in every walk of life. And they're presented to us as one thing, like a politician or a movie star or a sports star or a supermodel, as I say, or a prominent musician. And that's what we think of them as. But they play a very key role in this whole culture creation thing. I mean, another prime example is Jim Morrison of The Doors, who I bring up in most of my talks. And I do so because he just illustrates this point so well. you have this guy that was thought of as this iconic rock god who was anti-establishment and anti-war, and he was all about youthful rebellion. That's what he symbolized. He was the poster boy for that whole counterculture scene at that time in the 1960s. And yet, Dave McGowan showed in his book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, I think he was the guy that presented this piece of information for the first time, that Jim Morrison's dad was the Navy admiral that was in charge of the fleet of ships involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which kickstarted the Vietnam War and embroiled America in that bloody situation for many years, resulting in the loss of lives of millions of people. So how do you reconcile those two things? The Navy admiral that pulled off that stunt, and his son is up there saying, hey kids, drop out of society, take LSD, fight the war, Yeah. These people are Pied Pipers, and they often give confusing messages.
Yeah.
So often with these rock bands, you can do a bit of research and you discover their true nature, their background. You can see where they've come from. You can see they've got affiliations with the CIA or with Skull and Bones or whatever. And yet so often they put out songs that appear to be anti-establishment. They appear to be encouraging people to rise up and stick it to the man and all this kind of thing. And they appear to be on our side and saying all the right things.
Yeah.
So we're back to that again. They're saying all the stuff that we want to hear, but how sincere is it? Are these bands really walking the talk, or are they just giving us empty, vacuous messages that reinforces their status as heroes in our minds? But in reality, they're not undertaking any kind of activism themselves. They're not opposing the status quo, the powers that be, in any way. Yeah. They're just giving us apparent opportunities for rebellion just by listening to a pop song or attending a concert. It seems to me that they're harnessing what could be a rebellious spirit in the general public and could otherwise be channeled into really rising up and really taking some responsibility and really putting some activism on the ground. And they're steering it off in other directions and using that energy and just ensuring it goes nowhere. I think that's what the UK acid house scene was all about, which paved the way for this massive phenomenon of worldwide electronic dance music we've got, where you've got literally millions upon millions of young people every single weekend now going out to clubs, listening to this music, going to these big dance festivals. That's a lot of energy that's being harnessed and steered off in certain directions that could be used for other things.
Yes.
But because we have these godlike DJs and producers that people are revering as heroes and channeling all their attention and their energy towards them, and because of what's happening with the sound frequencies and the drugs, as I said earlier, to completely manipulate these people's perceptions of themselves and the world around them, you've got a situation which might otherwise have been used for something that genuinely benefits humanity, instead being steered off down a completely different path. And like I say, throughout the different decades, they've done it with different movements. You had the counterculture hippie scene. You had the punk scene. You had the acid house scene. You got all these other trends and fads and movements that blow up from time to time. Britpop, what happened to that? I mean, that's a prime example of a manufactured fad. We had this situation in the mid-90s where the media was telling us, oh, Britain's great again. It's cool Britannia. It's like the days of the 60s. It's Carnaby Street all over again. It's cool to be British. We got Chris Evans on the Radio 1 Breakfast Show. We got Blur and Oasis and Pulp and Supergrass, all these cool bands. Tony Blair's down with them. Look, Tony Blair used to smoke pot, and he used to play guitar in a band. Isn't he cool? He's one of us. It's cool Britannia, man. It's something to be proud of. And, that happened for a couple of years and it caught a lot of people up in its wake. And some people followed Blur, some people followed Oasis. And then after a couple of years, it just kind of fizzled out. Yeah. And now with the benefit of hindsight, we can look back at it and think, well, a load of old bollocks that was. Yeah. In the words of George Michael, actually. Yeah. Mm-hmm. George Michael did an interview with BBC Hard Talk a few years ago.
I saw it. It was a good interview.
It really was. He said some great stuff, and I think that was sincere. I don't think that was him reading from a script.
I agree.
I think those were the sincere comments of a guy that was speaking from the heart. Yeah. And one of the things the interviewer asked him was, oh, Cool Britannia, you were a part of that whole thing. And George Michael said, Cool Britannia was a load of old bollocks to me. that was just completely manufactured.
Yeah.
And he's right, it was. So I don't know if you want to segue into George Michael at this point. It seems a good opportunity to do that.
Yeah,
I wasn't planning to do so, but
there's a few out there that I believe are authentic, genuine, talented people who happen to stay at the top because of the talent and because the occultist or those who've been running the show, if they've got somebody who's got a really large following, they'll tolerate them there because they're making profit off them. So I imagine someone like George Michael, Prince, I do sort of think that Prince at some point in his life turned to be authentic. I don't know whether he sold his soul initially, but at some point I do believe that something hit him where, and Lauryn Hill is another one where, you know, she did the song I Get Out and she was talking about how you sell your soul. So I think there are some genuine, greatly talented people who get tricked into selling the soul and then they stay at the top because they're talented and they make a profit from the industry. What are your views on that?
I think there are two main ways that musicians get instigated into the industry. One of the ways is they quite simply come from a key bloodline. It's all about who their ancestors were. And I've seen many examples of this. You get musicians that are elevated to prominent positions because they come from key families. That's how their careers evolve. The other way is you get artists who display some raw talent. They've got skills and their potential is spotted early on by those whose job it is in the industry to sniff these people out. And I would actually say that Jay-Z is an example of one of those individuals, in my view. I think he was a guy who started out as a street hustler selling drugs on the street, and he wanted to get out of that lifestyle, and he had ambitions to be a rapper. And I believe that he developed skill and talent, and he had it dwelling within him, and it was spotted very early on, and he was inducted into the industry and made an offer and he signed a contract, and that's the point where he sold his soul, people would say. And I think there's quite a lot of literal truth to that phrase rather than it being some symbolic metaphor.
I really do believe it.
Yeah, he would be a good example of somebody that came into the industry that way. So I think there are many acts that start out with good aims. They start out natural, organic. They just want to be successful and put their music out, but they get corrupted and they get steered off at a certain point. And when they sign that contract and when their career gets elevated to the next level, they're no longer calling the shots. They're no longer in control. They're no longer making the decisions. Somebody else is calling the shots for them. I think that's probably what happened with U2. That is my view on Bono. I mean, Bono is a straight demon now. Bono is just...
I agree.
He doesn't even seem human to me anymore. Something has happened to that guy.
That was one of my biggest disappointments because I love the music so much and then I just can't listen to him anymore.
I think his soul has become so corrupted that he's something less than human now in the way he behaves and the way he looks even. He just seems to be... I don't know, there's just something about that guy. But it's my view that U2 probably, I might be wrong, and there might be some evidence that comes along to show that they were manipulated from day one, but I think they probably started out with the intention of just wanting to make it as a rock band, and very early on in their career, they were co-opted and they were steered off in certain desired directions. Yeah. And Bono showed himself to be a very willing, cooperative player, and that's why we saw him starting to hobnob with the likes of Bill Clinton and Tony Blair and Obama, and he has a role with the United Nations and he's best mates with Bill Gates and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's the way his career evolved.
Yeah.
But yeah, you get individuals like George Michael and Prince, who I would say are two examples of artists who regained some of their inherent humanity.
Yeah.
And they started to speak out about it. George Michael is a better example than Prince, I would say, because in my view, Prince was heavily mind-controlled from day one, and he was running the agenda from day one in his music. And I think I love Prince's music, and I always have.
Yeah.
And I continue to enjoy it, but I can see the damage that he has done over the years in terms of some of the symbolism, some of the themes that he's put out there. I can see that it has been harmful. It's had a harmful effect. I've got a very fascinating essay at the very end of my book by a guy called Dan Munro, who's a British researcher, now lives in Australia. But he put together this thesis on the themes and the symbolism in the music of Prince. and he sent it to me just before we got the tragic news of Prince passing away. We didn't know that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got the news, I said to him, this essay is so profound and it's now so timely that I need to put this in my book. And so he agreed to it. And what he's doing is taking all the songs that Prince put out over his various albums and showing how every time he put out a record about sexual sin, because most of Prince's records are about sex, let's face it.
Yeah.
And he's seen as this sordid, sleazy kind of guy. And yes, that's what he's going to be remembered as. But every time you get a song like that, when you look at the albums, there's always another one to counterbalance it. And he actually put out a lot of music in the form of album tracks that never made singles that talk about spirituality, redemption, and connectedness to the divine.
Mm-hmm.
So Prince was somebody that understood that kind of dichotomy and that balance and that duality.
I heard David Icke said he met Prince, and because he asked to meet him, and he was talking about how he believed that the music was channeled, because it was so creative, and it seemed to ring true to me. It felt like, I resonate with that statement.
Yeah, and one thing that strikes me about so many of these artists that just happen to pass away at untimely ages, George Michael just happens to die at the age of 53. How do you even die at 53? How do you just stop living like that? It just makes no sense. The guy that is most famous for the song Last Christmas I Gave You My Heart just happens to die on Christmas Day of heart failure. But there's nothing to see here, folks. Move along.
Yeah. The thing is, people don't see how many times this happens again. You've got to piece it all together. That in isolation, it just sounds crazy. But the things you start to uncover in your books, and you start to look at all the coincidences of the people who are dying at certain ages of certain things.
Prince died on the Queen's 90th birthday. And at that time, they had drenched a number of monuments around the world in purple.
Yeah.
Niagara Falls was drenched in purple light. And they say, it's for the Queen's birthday. But what a coincidence that an artist called Prince, very closely associated with the colour purple, Prince, happens to die on the Queen's birthday. But don't worry, it's just a coincidence, folks. There was a rapper called Prodigy from Mobb Deep, and he was very outspoken about the Illuminati.
Yes, he was.
Happened to die last year on the 20th of June, just before the summer solstice.
Yeah.
And you often find that solstices, equinoxes, other cosmically significant days figure in the dates that many of these artists pass away.
Yeah.
And there's so many other examples. But why is it that so many of these artists who pass away are ones that, at least in some of their songs, offered us some upliftment, some hope, some positivity? Michael Jackson put out quite a number of positive songs. They weren't all my cup of tea musically, but he had some messages in there. George Michael had one or two. Whitney Houston had one or two. Prince had a few. John Lennon had loads. Bob Marley had loads. And yet these are the artists that just happen to die. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, Mick Jagger and Tom Jones and Rod Stewart, Elton John, no problem. Bob Dylan, on, decade after decade. So certain ones seem to fall foul of the industry, and they're not allowed to continue putting out their own messages, and others play the game and are very obedient to the agenda and have very long careers as a result. That's the way I see it.
I saw an interview recently with Craig David, and he had lost his fame and fortune, and he's just started to get back into it. And he sounded, the interview was Regina Meredith, who runs, who's involved with Gaia TV, and it felt quite authentic when I listened to him. And I had that little bit of hope, maybe there's an authentic, genuine artist there, because he's a talented guy, and he did go off the scene. And maybe I felt like, maybe he didn't sell his soul, and, I'm hoping somewhere along the way there's a decent one or two out there.
It would be nice, wouldn't it? I don't know much about Craig David, but you find yourself hoping that somebody's going to come along and offer some upliftment like that. But
I'll send you the interview.
The trouble is when they do, sadly, because of the world we live in, you fear for what's going to happen to them, and you kind of expect them to turn up dead in a hotel room, death by hotel room. Like Dolores O'Riordan of the Cranberries the other week. Mm-hmm. But again, don't worry, folks. All these artists just happen to die in hotel rooms, but it's not suspicious because the police say so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot coming out now, and I think you know, I know it sounds with some of the stuff we're looking at is very dark and seedy, and especially if people are new to this, I'm mindful that somebody might be watching this who's never really looked into it. At the end of the show, I'm going to ask our producer Biggie to run a video that we were going to run at halfway point, but because we had the 10-minute break in between, I thought we'd carry on speaking, and in that video,
when are we going to, Joe? Just so I know.
Just in a few minutes, really. So, because we're coming towards the end of the show, it's nearly 11 o'clock now, so it's gone quite fast. But what I want to do is just ask a few questions before we go. First of all, what events have you got coming up that people can come and see you live speaking at?
Well, I've got a whole bunch of events where I'm presenting new information from the book Musical Truth 2, which has just come out. Got my copies last week. So I'm doing some events in the UK. I'm going by memory here. The first one is Friday, 9th of February in London. Keep Talking event. That's next Friday. Then I'm going to Latvia. I'm doing an event in Riga, Latvia. Then I'm doing the Open Minds Conference in Waterford, Ireland, 2nd to the 4th of March.
I'm going to be at that one, I think.
Are you? Excellent.
Yeah.
Brilliant. See you there.
Mm-hmm.
Straight after that, I'm going out to the States and I'm doing a conference in Phoenix, Arizona on the 10th of March called Truth, Mind, Reality with Mark Passio, Lennon Honor, a whole bunch of others. Really looking forward to that one. Doing a bookstore launch in Mystic Journey Bookstore in Venice, Los Angeles on the 14th of March. Then I'm back to the UK and I've got some dates at the end of March. Truth Juice Birmingham, 27th of March. I'm doing Truth Juice Hull on the 4th of April. In your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
And I've got New Horizons coming up in St. Anne's. I forget the date, but that's somewhere around the end of March. All my dates are going to be posted on my website, musicaltruthbook.com. So I'm looking to get all around the UK. I'm going to be doing Nottingham, Leicester, Bristol, and hopefully a few others as well in the coming weeks. So that's all on the way.
Fabulous. And where can people purchase both your books?
Well, they're both available on Amazon. So if you want to get the paperback copy, you can look for Mark Devlin, Musical Truth on Amazon and find me there. If people want to get copies from me personally, they might not think Amazon is the most ethical company in the world. And a lot of people like to cut them out of the equation and go straight to the author themselves. So if people want to get a signed copy from me, they're very welcome to drop me an email on markdevlinuk@gmail.com. And if they can pay by PayPal, I'll be happy to post a book out to them. And there's going to be a Kindle version of the book and also a hardback version. And they're going to be available on lightningsource.com. That's probably from next week. But the Amazon version and the one that people can get from me are available straight away.
Fabulous, and I'd highly recommend it. The detail in this leaves you without any doubt that there's something in this. And as the video that we're going to play at the end here now, yeah, and that's the new one, which I will be getting after I've finished doing this one. I've had this over a year now, but because I've got that many books on the go from guests that I've had on, that I'm sort of like ploughing my way through them. I'll be very knowledgeable by the time I've finished. So thank you ever so much, Mark, for coming on. I feel like we've only touched the surface on your new book, so I'd love to get you back on again at some point in the near future. And, you know, we could maybe do one of your presentations, get some slides up and, you know, so people can get a feel for the research that you've done, because we've talked quite generally tonight. And when you see your research, it's really compelling.
Yeah, it would be good to do that. These talks always go so quickly. And I've actually enjoyed the fact tonight that we have strayed away from the music industry stuff a bit, because I talk about it all the time, and I'm going to be doing a whole load of presentations this year where I go into that detail. It is good for me to stray from that sometimes and have a more generic conversation about issues of consciousness and truth, and we've touched on that a bit tonight. But I can appreciate that people probably want to delve into this information specifically, so it's all there in the book. A lot of my presentations are online on youtube.com/markdevlintv, which is my YouTube channel, so you can see some of my previous conference presentations there where I show slides so you can get a feel for the imagery and some of the symbolism that we're talking about. And I'll be doing that in all my public talks this year as well. Lots of videos. Yeah,
so wonderful. And I just want to say thank you. I can't stress enough that I feel so privileged, the people I get on here who do the research in individual areas. You've got such an important piece of the puzzle with what you're looking at. And the fact that you've really, you know, taken yourself out of life to throw this together and to stay committed. And I know it's a lonely road, it's difficult, and sometimes you feel like it's not making any difference. I'm here to tell you it is. Yeah, you are making a massive difference, and thank you for everything that you're doing.
Well, I really appreciate that, and the same back at you as well, because you're doing great work, and I guess we're both doing what we came here to do. That's what it is.
It is, absolutely. So thank you ever so much. So if we could run the video now. Good night, everybody, and thanks once again, Mark.
Thanks a lot. No worries.
All right, cheers.